exactly noon, so I think we will start. So let me welcome you all, speakers and guests, friends of our community. My name is Nagda Riz. I am the director of the Access to Knowledge for Development Center and an affiliate fellow at Yale's Information Society Project. A2K4D, our center, is based at the American University in Cairo at the School of Business, and we are proud partners of Yale ISP and the rest of the, with the Institute of Technology and Society, our friends here, and other partners within the Access to Knowledge Global Academy. I will take a couple of minutes. I welcome you all, of course. I'll take a couple of minutes to speak about, to mention some logistics. We are recording this session, so it is being recorded and we will share it afterwards. It's also being live streamed on Facebook. We are also tweeting to the hashtag A2K11. I will bring this up in a few minutes along with the Twitter handles of our speakers. I will ask everyone to kindly mute your mics while the speaker is speaking, and if you can kindly pose questions by raising your hand and just answering your question in person. Please feel free to leave your camera on. We'd love to see you. And this is an informal conversation among friends. So please raise your hand with questions. Also, feel free to write your question in the chat box, in the Zoom chat box, or in the comment section in the Facebook Live. Our team is curating the questions, and Nadine from our team will be has volunteered to ask the questions on your behalf. I will also ask the speakers to stick to their time. I will ask everybody to speak for 3 minutes. So kindly, stick to that so we are able to solicit as many, thoughts and insights as we can. I know we can never cover enough, but we'll try in this short session. Before I continue, let me just give the mic to Nicholas Guggenberger, Nick, our friend, Executive Director from Yale ISP, to just say a couple of words in a minute or two. Nick, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nagla. And I want to keep it short. I just want to thank thank your entire team for involving the ISP. Access to Knowledge has been a thriving partnership for the ISP, and we're delighted that we were invited to become part of the project and part of this presentation. And it's of course wonderful to see this product now coming out. Shout out to Ramesh and Stefanie for editing this great volume. Much looking forward to the discussion. And again, thank you so much for letting us be part of this.
Thank you very much, Nick. Yes, let me then get to our the topic for today or tonight. This is the book. Congratulations, Ramesh, Steph, and all the contributors and the part and ISP and A2K4D. The title of the book is Mobile Technology and Social Transformations, Access to Knowledge in Global Contexts. Let me just say a few words in my 3 minutes about the collaboration between A2K4D and ISP, a thriving collaboration, dating all the way back to 2006, actually. So we have a long history of partnership. Actually, we are also grateful to the gift of Mr. Richard Bartlett, the Bartlett gift, which has enabled us to run meetings, to achieve this, the publications, to host Bartlett Fellows at our respective institutions. So we acknowledge the Richard Bartlett gift. But let me just take you also to our larger circle of partners. Way back since we started, we established A2K4D in 2010. We were already working with the Yale ISP and with partners with Carlos and other partners from what we established as the Access to Knowledge Global Academy, which is a partnership of like-minded institutions between us, ISP, ITS in Brazil, Carlos and his colleagues, and also with friends from India, China, and South Africa. And together we have worked hard on producing a series of events and publications. We have the slide shows the books that we have published. I have at home with me the Access to Knowledge in Egypt, but we also, unfortunately, the other two are in the office, Access to Knowledge in Brazil, in India. We also, together, we published the Access to Knowledge and Global Censorship publication. But also, in all of this, this is our 5th joint publication. We're very, very proud. And we look forward to our next project, as we were chatting a while ago. I know the team is posting also on the chat box some links to our work and to the books themselves, actually. Very quickly, the background of this work was conceptualized in the office of Jack Balkan. Actually, we had a discussion when Lina Atalla was there, and then the discussion developed with staff, with Pranesh, also a partner, and Colin and members from the ISP. I'm very happy and proud that this book has come to fruition. Very quickly, the topic of the book, you've seen the title. We know that more than 2/3 of the world's population have mobile phones. We have the total number of mobile internet users, more than 4 billion, which actually is more than 90% of total internet users. So I don't have to make a case for mobile use and their impact of mobile phones on our lives. Let me then just highlight two tensions and paradoxes that is at the heart of our work and that I also see vivid in the chapter and the chapters of the book. One of them is the tension that technologies themselves, mobile phones, digital technologies, promote inclusion and lead to a voice for the small agents or the small players in society. Yet at the same time, they can be used to exclude. They can be used, actually, members of populations and groups can be left out using these technologies. So there is a tension, there is a paradox. Another paradox and tension is the tension between market concentration, these technologies leading to concentration by large companies, corporations, but also by states in the realm of politics. And at the same time, they can give voice to activism, social media, and ways of collective movements, which we will hear about in our discussion. But also, so you see competition and market concentration, tension, you see inclusion and exclusion and exacerbating inequalities, another tension. So in a way, I see a lot of that happening. Let me then introduce very quickly our panelists. I will ask our team to put the slide with their names. We are joined by the two editors, Stefanie Felsberger, PhD candidate in Cambridge, and also previously at A2K4D Bartlett Fellow. Ramesh Subramanian at Quinnipiac University and also with Yale ISP. Carlos Afonso de Souza, director at Institute of Technology and Society from Brazil. We're also joined by Celina Botero from Brazil, again from ITS. We're joined by our colleague Colin Agour at Hubbard School of Journalism in the University of Minnesota. Harry Halpin, I hope Harry has joined us. I don't see on the screen. I hope he has joined us. He is with Inventeur du Monde Numérique in France, and William Lasitakuana with the University of Botswana in Botswana. So you see a wide array hi Harry, a wide array of countries represented, wonderful authors. So I now turn to Ramesh and Steph to say a few words about the themes of the chapters. And I hope each of you will try and stick to the 3 minutes, so then we open the discussion with our authors. And thank you all very much one more time. Ramesh, please go ahead.
Thank you, Nagla and Nick, as well as Heather, who's not here at the Yale ISP, and also the folks at the American University of Cairo. And thanks, of course, to Helena Hurd and her wonderful team at Bartlett for making this book a reality. Now, this book has been actually 4 years in the making, and that is very serious because 4 years in the mobile world is actually a very long time indeed. But if you look at if you take a cursory glance at the book, it'll show how current the contributions are. So thanks to our contributors, and we have, of course, 4 or 5 of our wonderful contributors right here. Because of them, we have a terrific lineup of chapters, a great cast of characters. We have chapters from Africa, North, as well as Sub-Saharan Africa. We have chapters from South Korea, in India, and in Brazil, and of course the US, and so on. So there are a great list of events, a great list of stories, great illustration of the myriad ways in which mobile technology has become so ubiquitous to, as Nagla mentioned, 2/3 of the population of the world. So I'm actually going to let the other panelists talk about the contents of the book. So I'm really going to talk a little bit about how I became involved in this project. 4 years ago, my colleague at the ISP, Colin Agour, asked me if I could take up another book project for the ISP, this time on mobile technologies and A2K. And at that time, I had already completed 2 books. So one of them was shown to you by Nagla. It was Access to Knowledge in India, as well as the flow of global flow of information for the ISP. And my research interests, of course, were very aligned to A2K and mobile computing. Now, Colin and I have a fairly long relationship. I've known him from his doctoral student days at Columbia. And I was also on Colin's doctoral committee. So he and I shared a common interest in mobile telephony, as well as social transformations in India. Colin was supposed to be the original editor of the book, but as he was getting ready to go to Minnesota, he invited me to take over as editor team in Cairo and made a lot of wonderful new friends. And one of them is Stefanie. Stefanie and I had several discussions. We tinkered with the CFP. We sent out requests, finally selected the contributors, ironed out the themes, sections, and topics. We felt that the topics and the authors truly represented what mobile technology had become and what it was doing to the global society. The end result of all is, of course, now this book. So special thanks to Carlos, William, Colin, Harry, and Selena to be here today. And in fact, as further proof of its importance for the present time, Routledge fast-tracked this book for publication in both the paperback as well as hardback editions at the same time, because they felt it was important for it to find a way quickly into the classrooms. Now, I have to warn you that this book is not all about the triumphs of mobile technology. Sure, it documents great uplifting stories, but also some not so uplifting ones about mobile technology. You'll hear all about that from our panelists today. So now I will stop and let Stefanie take over and talk about some of these inconsistencies. So thanks all for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ramesh. Steph, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I will just add to the list of thanks that Ramesh has started off with. So yeah, thanks to everyone at A2K and Gina for organizing the event, and also to Nagla and the ISP for all the support throughout this project, and obviously to Ramesh for, you know, the long time that we've spent together working and making this project a reality. And also thanks to all the authors who are here today, and also Helena and everyone at Routledge who's been really supportive. I'll very quickly talk about kind of the themes and how we've put them together and how we thought together access to knowledge and mobile technology. So A2K in its most basic tenets refers to physical access to sources of knowledge, such as in a book, or in our case, a mobile phone, and the ability to understand this knowledge. And at A2K, where I've spent a lot of my formative academic years, this definition always also understood or included the ability to participate in the creation of knowledge and sharing of knowledge that is based on one's local context and understanding. And I think this is a very important distinction. And this definition also shifts our understanding when it comes to access to knowledge mediated through mobile technologies. So already in the past, access to knowledge has depended on and been structured by different infrastructures. Knowledge that's accessed through a book, while it might seem neutral, is also produced by a printing press and dependent on different infrastructure. So every kind of infrastructure really enables different modes of access, control, social change, and economic opportunity. And these are also the 4 themes that the book explores and that the chapters are grouped under. And so the book has been interested in the particular modes of access and control that mobile technologies enable, and the social and economic changes that develop as a consequence. So we're interested in how are mobile technologies set up, and how does this configuration affect the proliferation and accessibility of mobile devices and knowledge. And the chapters in this book, as has already been alluded to by Nagla and Ramesh, they paint very different pictures of how mobile technologies have shaped and have been shaped by their specific contexts. They really complicate the notion that mobile phones simply increase access to information or knowledge. And the chapter provides detailed snapshots of the different discussions and conversations around mobile technologies as they play out in their local contexts. they do not all come to the same conclusions. Instead, they give us seemingly contradictory insights into the politics, histories, and different lived realities of mobile technology use and application. For example, the contradictions between access and control as they're enabled by mobile technologies are very interesting, especially to me. And the chapters in this volume, and like, so initially like conversations or like general questions asked on this topic are, oh, is the internet enabling technology? Are mobile technologies a tool for freedom or control? So it's like an either or question. But the chapters in this volume really show us that we need to ask different questions, such as when and where are mobile technologies used for social good, and how can communication infrastructures be built so that most people have access to the social and economic opportunities these technologies provide. And I'm really interested to let the discussion start and let you go to the details of all the different things that I've alluded to.
Thank you very much, Steph. Let me then jump on immediately to our start to our discussion, and just picking from the thread from Steph, we've spoken about the tensions, the paradoxes, and really focus on the promise of access. Let's just look into the promise of access. On one hand, does A2K change one's social and economic opportunities? And on the other hand, how does economic and social status influence the knowledge you can access? So I'm going to turn to William from the story of Botswana and ask you immediately, how has the access to mobile technologies specifically shaped the access of different groups of people? And perhaps more, more interestingly or more importantly, how has the people's socioeconomic status influence who can take up these offered services? So it's a two-way relationship. How have the technologies impacted the access of different groups, and how were the statuses that groups came from? How did that influence who takes up and who doesn't? Looking at mobile technologies and inclusion with a question mark. William, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very true. I have to start with maybe trying to answer the first question, which wants me to specifically explain what has happened and to what extent the government rollout of the services have been successful. What is actually happening in Botswana is that for over a couple of years, but perhaps maybe I should state this, that the book, as you know, is almost 5 years old. And a lot of change has taken place since then. But at the time at which I was looking at this, it's very true that access to tax has enabled access to public services in Botswana. To give a very clear picture, mobile operators in Botswana, say Botswana Telecommunications, B-Mobile, Orange, and Mascom, these are mobile operators here, have spent so much resources to try and extend access to mobile communication. This includes even selling handsets. This includes even extending signal networks to almost every part of the country. And they've been given the contracts at some point by the government to try and roll out the services. So far, everywhere you go in Botswana, you'll find that there is mobile communication signal network. And what mobile operators were trying to do, were trying to canvass the whole country, ensure that almost everyone is connected. Because the idea has been this: if maybe the people in the city who are economically well off would have connections, they would have to also connect with the people who are far from them, who will be their relatives and the like. Because in Botswana, we have some kind of a tripartite kind of lifestyle, where those in the cities will be working to earn money to support those in the villages, like the extended families in the villages. And then those in the villages, again, will have other means, which could be at the farms, at the cattle posts and the like. So there'll be that connection across the three places. And then it means mobile operators, we have to reach both the places so that there can be connection or connectivity among the people in different places. For that very reason, while mobile operators were rolling out communication networks and mobile technologies, the service providers, who would be government, who would be private individuals, private companies, will also try to sell services to the people. These are not necessarily mobile services, but then they will now change the way they share information with the people to ride through mobile telephony. And then with mobile telephony, enabling access, enabling accessibility to information, it means now they are coming to use mobile telephony. And then as they use mobile telephony, it means now people are connected. At the same time, they are able to share information. So this will be like government wanting to share information about maybe tax rebates and the like. They'll put this on SMS notifications. Maybe doctors wanting to communicate with their patients on maybe medication which should be taken on ratio, and then they will try to put this information again on mobile communication services. And as a result, we start to see people having access to mobile services, and these people will be anyone, could be those who are rich, could be those, because mobile operators have enabled access. Coming to the second question, how has mobile shaped in terms of socioeconomic status, and how has this influenced of ability of the services? Interestingly, in Botswana, again, one of the things you'll see is that the type of service which has been very common is what you call prepaid services. This is like we will be using, people will be using their money by budgeting properly. That's to say, perhaps I have only $10, and then I know that from $10, I can spend $2 on mobile operation or mobile service. So they will just use money in that way, budgeting properly, and then they'll just buy specifically for use so that they could use at the time that they need to use. So it doesn't really impact on people so much in terms of maybe getting to rip them off. At the same time, we have the government trying to meet people halfway. This is to say, they ensure that the services are cheaper. They try as much as they can to get down the prices for mobile operation services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. Now I turn to Carlos and Selena. I want to talk about the perils of blockage and what happens when mobile phones are blocked. Now, your chapter in Brazil, you tell us a story about initially how there's an example where access to mobile technology enabled socioeconomic opportunities and better A2K, yet you very carefully take us through the story of how the government blocked non-approved cell phones and the impact of that on creating a trade-off between access to knowledge and global and economic opportunities. So looking at mobile phones, and are we looking any more at inclusion or perhaps exclusion of some groups? So I would love to hear from each of you, an answer to each of, each one can take one question. Can you tell us how this example relates to bigger questions of who can benefit the most from new technologies, who is left out and at whose expense? If one of you could answer that, and if the other author could tell us the trade-off between, on the one side, the access to knowledge of specifically marginalized groups of people in Brazil, and on the other side, the regulatory interests, the tension between those two, regulatory interests and the marginalized groups of Brazil. So who would like to take which question? Please go ahead. This is for Carlos and Selena, Brazil.
Selena, you go first.
Okay, no problem. Very quickly before, thank you for the questions, Anagla. And before entering to specific question, I think it's nice to give a very brief overview of the case, which was involving, it was back in 2014. The Anatel, which is the Brazilian regulatory body for telecommunications, announced that they would block all the non-certified devices, cell phone devices in the country. And just informing that, giving a reason for that would be that they impact the network of the use of the normal cell phones. But they never showed any research showing or study really showing the impact that these phones would have in the network as a whole. And this measure would be would have a huge impact because it would eventually disconnect from one day to the other like 40 million people. And then this shows and the fact that these phones, the uncertified phones, they are cheaper than the other phones, and we see how, as you were mentioning before, like how the mobile devices has been increasingly more important and gaining more importance as this gateway of connecting people, right? And like figures in Brazil shows how, for example, in certain areas, more outside of the big largest cities such as São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, in the northern areas, the northern regions, the percentage of people that only connect with computer and cell phone devices is huge. The difference, for example, in the Amazon region, for example, only computers is 1.6% of the population that connecting using only computers, whereas more than 50% use cell phones as their main way and only way to connect, to be connected. So we could see how, and these figures are from like these few years ago, which we see that how it's only rising the importance of mobile devices to be connecting people, especially and then going to your question, who will be left behind if this measure would actually be implemented? Would be the people that are more vulnerable and have no other opportunities to engage and connect and be informed and have eventually access to knowledge. But just to wrap up about the situation, at the time when we at ITS heard about this measure, we presented a report for Anatel showing the impact that it would have in the amount of people that would be disconnected, and showing that this measure was very not proportional and was violating their some rights, right? And as a result, the measure was not implemented. At the time, also we had like the World Cup also happening, and then they would have also an impact for cell phones that be from foreigners that would be here in the country. So they decided not to implement, and then it took some years, and they changed the initial plan, which was just from one day to the other disconnecting all of these cell phones that were not registered, from just saying that from a certain day on, and putting a campaign of information campaign, because before we did this report, nothing was in place. Like they would no information, there were no people did not know what was going to happen. So they did they halted all the initial plan and did some amendments, putting this information campaign, and just saying that from a specific date on, that the ones that have already using this phone, will be able to continue, but new ones won't be able to connect. And that helped to mitigate and prevent and avoid disconnection of this size.
Thank you, Selena. Thank you. Carlos, do you have, would you like to provide us with a contribution? 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
Super quick. And thanks, Nagla. Thanks, Ramesh and Steph, for all the hard work in this book. The one thing that we love about the story that we were able to tell about Brazil is how this whole discussion of non-approved cell phones being blocked shows some insensitivity by the part of the regulator on the impact that will have in the access to knowledge and the access to information to a huge chunk of the population that doesn't have access to more expensive cell phones. And the one thing that I love about it is that the way that this situation ended up being resolved, so ended up showing how A2K goes way beyond the issues that we were discussing 10 years, almost 15 years ago. Being part of this group, this A2K Global Academy and friends working on those topics, it's really interesting. And I'm just showing very, very briefly here. I had some sort of family reunion here. So we had our book on intellectual property, and then we turned to our book on A2K and free speech and censorship, and now the book on mobile technology and cell phones. I think that's really interesting because it ended up creating this a whole network of subjects that are connected to the very essence of access access to knowledge. And just to conclude, showing that why disinformation and why this topic is really important in Brazil. Some of the major topics that we are discussing in Brazil on internet policy nowadays, they all leading to the discussion on who has a cell phone and what is this person doing with a cell phone. We have more cell phones than people in Brazil currently. And we think, if you think about our major topics on internet policy, they are misinformation through WhatsApp and other direct messaging apps that will require a cell phone. The whole discussion of surveillance for fighting against COVID-19 that will require a cell phone. So this is just to show that cell phone became a device that is a centerpiece for a lot of discussions on internet policy, on internet regulation. And I'm really happy that the book addresses some of the basics that will allow us to understand how this conversation move forward.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and thank you for bringing the book on global censorship, because that I have in the office. So thank you for putting it up. I do not have that with me here. So great points. Let me then move on in the interest of time to Colin, and moving more perhaps towards competition versus concentration, economically and politically. Colin, your chapter details how mobile phones were used by people in Hong Kong during the umbrella movement to mobilize against oppression for more rights. What was the experience of local activists you interviewed? How did they experience the fact that mobile technologies enable both access and control at the same time? And what have you learned that could be of use, and perhaps giving segue also to the following speaker about mobile technology infrastructures that enshrine protection for human rights? Colin, the floor is yours. Thank you. 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Nagla, and thanks for having me, and thanks for all the effort that went into this book. It's a tremendous group effort. Some quick thoughts here. Talking to journalists and activists in Hong Kong who put to use specifically WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger during the umbrella movement, one thing that struck me was just how keenly aware they were of how the technology works, whether it's the hardware, how long will the battery last, how many battery packs do you need, where is the charging plug at McDonald's so that no one will notice that you're stealing electricity, all of that stuff. Really, like material things really mattered. Also how the software works, what things that are supposed to be encrypted really are. What do you need to do if you get arrested, and to make sure that you're not creating problems for people on the same group chat. So very much aware of that they were up against the Hong Kong regime, but its masters in Beijing who were calling many of the shots with respect to surveillance. So that's one, keen awareness. The second is this kind of, I would call it almost a slide from the beginning, this enthusiasm, this moment of unity, all kinds of people coming together, really different lived experiences, but a shared set of goals. Look how many people we can reach, right, using this technology. Then it kind of moves to a bit of frustration. Well, why don't these old people trust us? Why can't people in legacy media understand that what we're saying is true? To disillusionment, realizing that winning WhatsApp isn't the same as winning newspapers and television news. And then at the end, defeat, realizing that they had a really good case to make, that they were trying to protect what was left of Hong Kong's autonomy, that they're trying to advance the long promised but never delivered idea of universal suffrage, trying to pursue these things, getting a lot of engagement, huge numbers of people downloading apps in the streets, polling showing clear preference for this, but ultimately not being able to sustain a durable majority of Hong Kongers of what they were trying to do. And so this links, I think, to the point about infrastructure, that if you're able to connect people in a way that is safe and secure, that promotes trust, and it is a platform on which people can not just discuss ideas, but actually advance them. That's the theory, right? And that's the goal. And so some of these things may come from privacy by design, right? Which is appealing to users, but runs against a lot of industry incentives. And indeed some established norms at this point. So the infrastructure question is important, but not at all easy to answer. And one of the things I'll say generally about this book is that it's really useful in this respect, because this question of infrastructure and social connections and ability to affect change. That cuts across several of the chapters. And I think this is a really great starting point for future questions. If we were to do this all over again, I think starting today, we would have a chapter about Belarus, for example, and there will undoubtedly be others as well. So the conversation continues.
Thank you very much, Colin. Lots of your chapter brought uprising in the Arab Spring, basically. And Harry, your chapter brought tears to my eyes. You focus on the early days of the Syrian uprising when you discussed attempts to use mobile and communication technologies with Basil Safadi, a local activist. You describe how the effort to mobilize fell short because the local and international infrastructure around mobile technology enabled government control, repression, and arrest. You argue that free and uncontrolled access to knowledge also needs to entail control over the means of communication. Forgive me for paraphrasing. You have beautiful prose, you have quotes that, that I just kept putting hearts next to. So I would love to hear from you. Tell us more about your chapter, and can you explain why all of this is important, and tell us about these examples of community-owned GMS or internet networks and more. 3 minutes, please.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So thank you so much. I'm honored to be part of this book, and I think the work that Access Knowledge is doing is very important. And it's been wonderful to hear from Botswana and other places where I'm not so familiar with what's going on. I mean, I'm not an expert on Syria, but I was friends with Basil Safadi, or Basil Kardabil, as I think his real name is. And he reached out during the kind of early part of the Syrian revolution. He was a technical expert himself, and he thought that at some point the reliance in Syria, there's not too many telcons. There's SyriaTel, I think 2 other smaller ones. And he realized that because all of the work by the activists and the social movements were going over these mobile lines, that this would be a way to possibly track them and hurt them. So they tried to switch to Skype. Skype had a back door, and eventually Basil was arrested and we believe murdered in jail several years later. So this is a unfortunate story, but what he had as a very good vision that he articulated very clearly to me, and I kind of wanted to share this because it had not been articulated before to my knowledge. He said that it's very important for people involved to actually maintain control of mobile infrastructure via using open source components, that we do have open source components. They've been deployed in Mexico. They deployed with the UN's help in Indonesia for GSM and even data mobile networks. And he said that if we'd had some of these components, we wouldn't have been so dependent, and these components need to have better security and privacy. It's something I'm working on today. And I do want to end, the chapter was written years ago when Basil's death was still fresh in my mind. But I do want to have, we do have somewhat of an update. The situation was looking pretty dismal, I think, a few years ago in Syria with the rise of Daesh. But luckily, essentially people were dependent on Turkcell and on SyriaTel. But the Northeastern Autonomous Administration Syria actually ended up setting up partially using open hardware and companies from Iraq, their own mobile infrastructure. And so I think that's pretty impressive. It's called RCell. And when they had a jihadi invasion, they turned it on for free for all the people to share internet to prevent more people from being killed. So I think there's a lot of great lessons that we can still learn in a positive sense from Syria as well, and hopefully other countries do not have to repeat this.
Thank you very much, Harry. I'm going to open it up for questions. I have a question myself, but I'm going to keep this for later. And let me just mention to people with us in the audience that please feel free to use the raise hand function to ask your question. I know that Nadine from our team is compiling questions on social media and the chat. So Nadine, would you like to pose the questions that you have received? Go ahead, Nadine.
Sure. Let me get to the sheet. All right. So I'll just take these in order. I'll read them out as we've received them.
Yes.
So
how many do you have, Nadine?
I have one, two, three. I have.
Maybe then we can have the speakers. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Would you like me to read out 3? Okay.
Please,
all right.
Please.
Okay. So the first question I have is for William. And the question goes as follows. So a multi-stakeholder approach to adopting ICTs and technologies more broadly is being encouraged globally. In your work about Botswana, there is a large role played by the government in encouraging mobile telephone use among citizens. To what extent can we say it is the government or public sector's responsibility to push for wider access to mobile and/or other technologies? So it's a question about the role of government and access.
Okay.
The next question is for Selena and/or Carlos. So it's about the Brazil study. In light of reactionary government and political sphere in Brazil, to what extent is there pushback against restriction of knowledge and access to technologies like cell phones? Can you tell us about civil society reactions and measures against this crackdown? Okay, and then there is another question for Colin. As mobile technologies enable new modes of political organization, how can we best tackle the threat of exacerbating government policies with regards to cyberspace?
And so each question is directed to a speaker. And Harry, please feel free to.
Yeah, because Harry spoke to this question, yes. But
feel free to also chip in whenever,
So we got the question before Harry spoke, so
yeah. Okay, so maybe we can start in order. William, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, let me go ahead right from here. Let me first perhaps mention that the government has actually played a big role. This is purely because the people in Botswana is a developing country, and expectations, as I'm describing it, will be that majority of the people will be poor. And for that very reason, it meant that the government has to take responsibility. And what is also interesting about Botswana is that the population is very, very small. It's 2.5 million in a land size of about 585 square kilometers, which I think would be something around maybe 150,000 square miles or something. So this is like big chunk of land, small population, and the population dispersed around this whole land. And it means it is going to be very costly for mobile operators to roll out the services to these places, because it would be perhaps hundreds of kilometers for them to place mobile devices there for transmission. At the same time, you'll find maybe that there'll be a small population which is targeted at one location. So the government was doing this, knowing very well that it is difficult, it's expensive for mobile operators to roll out the service to this place. So they assisted in rollout of technology, especially technology for signal networks. And now the mobile operators has to ride on this technology, now providing mobile operation services. And then it meant the government was also doing a bit more, and then the mobile operators were met halfway. At the same time, the government was very responsible for regulation in the sense they also had to ensure that the population is also benefiting in terms of the costs. So they tried to ensure that the prices were brought so low so that they don't become too expensive for the users. This is prices for mobile calls, prices for SMS, sending SMSs, and nowadays the population is also trying to use even internet services, which are provided mostly on mobile communication services through the internet. And the government has also tried as much as possible to meet the people halfway by ensuring that internet costs are even very low through mobiles.
Thank you, William. So can we have the response from Brazil?
Sure, we'll be quick because that's a very good and very complex question. And the situation in Brazil is definitely getting complex by the day. But I'll just give one example. So last week, the government presented / was leaked a proposal, suggestion to change the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights. It's a law that has been approved in 2014, having a lot of provisions on freedom of speech, net neutrality, data protection, and so on. But the government believes that especially big tech and social media companies from abroad are censoring speech from the government, And by the end of the day, our president gave out this speech saying that people deserve to receive the truth in their cell phones, in their devices, directly from him. And the president very usually refers to this passage of the Bible, you know the truth will set you free. So having this idea that true information comes from social media accounts, from the president himself, and from representatives of the government, we are now facing in Brazil a dispute over the how much liberty do you have platforms to moderate content, and that's something that relates pretty much to the apps that people have on their phones. So we can clearly see next year is election year for president in Brazil, that we will have definitely some regulatory crackdown on the ability of some companies to regulate some online spaces, especially instant messaging apps and social media as a whole. This seems to be a crucial element for the current administration. And we will see by the end of the day that this explosion in the number of cell phones in Brazil end up leading to the enlargement of the impact of any regulatory measure that this current administration end up delivering. Selena, I'm not sure if you want to say something else on this topic.
No, I think you covered it. It's something to be very very attentive and closely looking, because things will develop maybe not in a nice way over here. So we can try and help keep everyone updated, but I think that's it. And for the interest of time, I would see if there are more other questions.
Thank you, Carlos and Selena. Colin, would you like to answer the question addressed to you?
Sure, I'm just rereading this question that Nadine was so kind to send me. So yes, how do we best tackle the threat of exacerbating repressive government policing in cyberspace? Well, some of this is it is a multi-stakeholder governance kind of answer, that we need people beyond just governments involved in the administration of cyberspace, that there's a role for companies to play in terms of designing things to protect against repression. There's a role for NGOs and civil society to play in terms of creating not just media literacy, but mobile literacy. There is a role to play for individual users, for schools, for teachers, for all of us who are in academia. There's no single person who can solve all of this, unfortunately, but that is, of course, part of the challenge. And I think one other thing we can remind ourselves is that as concerned as we are about mobile communication, we also need to be concerned about it in relation to other aspects of state power. So the fact that a journalist can be effectively kidnapped from a plane at 37,000 feet, that's a story not only about mobile technology. Of course, they were taking photos of him at the airport in Athens using a mobile phone and using simple devices to conduct surveillance, but also woven into that the traditional kind of statecraft power, authoritarianism. That when we situate mobile communication in that context, it becomes that much more worrisome. So it's a bad news kind of answer, unfortunately, but I would say vigilance.
Thank you, Colin. Harry, would you like to speak to this question as well? Harry? Harry, are you still with us? I can't see. Are you on mute, perhaps? I'm afraid we might have lost Harry. Okay. So maybe we can get back to this. Actually, I was going to use a quote from Harry's chapter. That's in the next round of questions. I know Nadine has a couple. But there is a quote in the chapter that says A2K is a necessary but not sufficient condition for freedom. And using necessary but not sufficient, this is the language that we use as economists, and I'm always fascinated by this. So I wanted to ask Harry, but I'm not sure, I'm not having the full view of not sure if Harry is still with us, but this is open for anyone to, this is like the question is what else is needed freedom, for inclusion, for mitigating inequalities? Is it, people always talk about technology not being enough, but also we're looking at A2K itself not being enough. So what else is needed? This is an open question that the panel can, any of the panelists, Harry or any of the panelists can take, but let me also ask Nadine to read this. I know Ramesh also has a question to Harry as well. Nadine, if you'll allow me, I'll just read that. You mentioned the success of activists in Syria in using open source, software and hardware. How did they get access to these? How can these be transmitted to other activists elsewhere in the world? So this is also to Harry, who I'm not sure if anybody can help me. My screen, I'm not sure is still on the call, but maybe Nadine can read the couple of questions, which I understand are also generally addressed to the whole panelists, and people can pick which ones to take. Go ahead, Nadine.
Nagla, I think we have Lucia was raising her hand. Yes, Lucia.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yes. And it's very sorry, and it's very related to the last question. Just like in light of what's going on with Palestine at the moment, how can mobile tech infrastructure be built for Palestinians being avoided to be restricted with their technology and communication, mostly in social media platforms?
Okay,
I
great.
think, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that can be, it's mostly for Harry, which I think is back.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Or if somebody else, yeah, and if someone else have something else to say. Thank you.
And so is my screen is back. Good, I can see everyone. Sorry about that. So maybe Harry, if you'd like to address these last couple of questions, and then Nadine will come back with questions to the panelists as well. Go ahead, Harry.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the question of the censorship of the Palestinian social movements is very real. You know, I have friends in the Middle East, one of you here on the call, who, you know, they have to use special apps to, for example, change the spelling of the word Gaza so it gets through the filters. Now there's a problem with this, because what essentially happens, how these filters work, is they're based on what's called machine learning or AI. So they will learn these tricks that people are using over time and eventually become better and better at blocking them. And this is really, really terrible insofar as that, you know, it does actually prevent news from getting out. And the amount of technology both the Israeli and the US government have is much larger than, for example, you know, Syria with Assad, in terms of the ability to censor people. So the question is there any way to stop this? And and the problem is that you have a network effect issue, where effectively you could tell people to use alternative infrastructure. So one of the nice things about mobile technology is I can use a mobile technology standard-based open infrastructure and run my own mobile network, and I can still connect with other phones, thanks to, for example, GSM standards and all this wonderful work. And we do not have that with social media. So if all of the, for example, Palestinian activists went to a censorship-resistant platform, such as Mastodon, no one would join. Or, for example, a peer-to-peer based platform. I know a friend of mine, Nadim Kobesi, a Lebanese programmer, is working on a censorship-resistant version of Twitter and Facebook based on blockchain technology and peer-to-peer streaming. It should be much harder to censor. But I think the political question, the technology exists, the blockchain channels exist, the standards exist that make censorship-resistant social media. And I don't think regulatory solutions will solve this. It looks like regulatory solutions will make this worse. There'll be increased censorship over time. So I think what we really have to do is we have to encourage our friends, and I can't give you a better answer right now, to look in and to use these alternative technologies. And a lot of this, the onus of fixing these technologies and getting one good standard, really lays upon us programmers to fix it. I do want to say one point of hope, which is that I am part of this effort. It does appear that Twitter, using the acronym Blue Sky, will probably decentralize over the next few years, such that Twitter itself will be harder and harder to censor, because there will no longer be a central server under a kind of regulatory oversight by the United States government or Israel or someone else. So I do think there is hope, but it will take 2 or 3 years. And I hope the damage to social movements and human rights is minimized in between that time.
Thank you, Harry. Nadine, would you like to pose? Let me suggest, because we have 5 minutes, I would suggest that Nadine poses the questions that she has received. Also, Ramesh had a question. I think this was already addressed. And maybe I will ask the speakers, to go around and either answer the question or say a last few words on their work or commenting on other colleagues' work. So Nadine, maybe you can read the couple of questions.
There's one question that we haven't responded to that we received, and it's a question basically about. So we know that the chapters in the book are a couple of describing things a couple of years back, but the question asks, in light of the pandemic now, do you have examples in your countries of where mobile technologies have been used in certain ways to mitigate either health problems or other problems that have taken place? I mean, the example that comes to mind here in Egypt is that they're trying to use the cell phones for vaccine registration with some limited success, some issues with that because, again, of connectivity. So we were just wondering, the question here is wondering if there are other examples from the countries, for everyone on the call, if you have examples of how mobile techs have been used, for example, for telehealth or other things in light of the pandemic.
And also, if I may also add to this, whether this also touches on any of the tensions we spoke about.
Yes,
so
yes,
again, is that a way for governments to have control of people's data? Are we looking at concentrations of large health centers, for example, as opposed to a small budding entrepreneurship scene? I mean, so this is the kind of thing that would be really great to think of in your last reflections, if I may ask, because we are getting close to the end, and maybe we could go in reverse order. So I can start with the reverse. We'll start with Harry and then go, Harry, Colin, Brazil, and then William, if I may ask, and also Steph and Ramesh. So Harry, would you like to?
Yeah, so I'll post a link in a minute, but at MIT, where I'm still a fellow and used to work, we have very good evidence that pandemic-based responses, if you give people access to mobile data and you give them access to data and knowledge about it, they do have better behavior. So it's important to defeat future pandemics that we have equal and free, ideally, access to the internet knowledge over mobile. The two apps that we've seen used in Europe, where mobile access is quite good, is contact tracing, which hasn't worked very well, but we do have a very good design, which is part of Google and Apple, called DP3T. And to some extent, vaccine registration. I do want to point out that vaccine registration could be dangerous, could lead to unequal and discriminatory behavior against poorer countries, and could lead to discrimination. And I'm currently working with the European Commission to try to prevent that, and as well as prevent a global ID database. I do think in order to let people travel, we should not have vaccine passports registration, but we should also allow paper registration and not make economics, your economic wealth part of your ability to travel or your access to vaccines. So it's going to be a hard fight, though, I'll be honest.
Thank you very much. So next is Colin. Would you go ahead?
Well, just very briefly, I think that what's clear is there's room for a book about mobile COVID issues. Certainly a chunk of that could be about contact tracing and other apps that have a very health-centric way of using the technology. Everything from that to the scams. There are many, many scams that exist, and mobile social media is one of the most important vectors of that. We have really differentiated efforts at national levels around the world of how to use this technology. And one of the things I worry most about isn't actually the most insidious. It's the most everyday. And it's just bad software and interfaces that are not user-friendly. And so people get left behind. It's not necessarily the goal to leave them behind, but it's what happens. So if you're trying to register for a vaccination appointment, and maybe you're older, maybe you're less familiar with the technology, or you're just, you don't feel comfortable dealing with the healthcare system, it can be really intimidating. And so we see that follow along some really traditional lines of socioeconomics and exclusion. So these are things I think we need to guard against, not just the terrifying stuff in the headlines, but also the everyday stuff, to making sure that we're doing that, really that last mile of effort to make sure that the really remarkable successes in vaccines and health initiatives are available to all.
Thank you, Colin. Selena?
Let me just,
Carlos, yeah, please.
Yeah, let me just flip the order so that Selena can end with good news. I think A2K is proving to be an evolving concept, and the whole conversation about A2K and the fight against COVID-19 shows how access to knowledge and access to information is needed more than ever, especially in a developing country like Brazil, in which cell phones end up posing this element of being protagonists on where, how, and to which information people have access to. We see a lot of debate in Brazil about still hydroxychloroquine as the magical solution to COVID-19, and people end up getting this type of false information through their cell phones. So I think A2K is a powerful vehicle for us to understand that access to information, access to knowledge will certainly lead to better solutions to some of the challenges that we're facing right now. And Celina has some other examples from Brazil as well on that. So go ahead, Celina.
Thank you, Carlos.
Just very quickly, just to talk a bit, not exactly in the same apps of focusing on health issues, on contact tracing and stuff, but on another aspect that was important here, the potential use of the devices to help the people, especially the most vulnerable ones, receive the aid that the government was giving, money for these people that were very mostly impacted. They, instead of going to banks and being not in isolation, they could receive it by their phone. So there were projects already in this sense, and how it could help this age get in their people's houses without having the need to be moving from one place to the other.
Thank you, Celina. William, go ahead.
Yes, I just posted something on the message board here, but in actual fact, the government has actually developed a mobile app, which is being used across all mobile networks. The app is to facilitate registration of movements. This is to say, when people go to public places for meetings or anything, they will have to register first. And it's like every facility has been given its own specific code. So the mobile phones will be used to scan this code and register an individual who is coming in. And then this will be assisting in terms of contact tracing, assisting in terms of letting to know who has been there, who can be followed, in terms of such things. And at the same time, vaccine registration is also facilitated through this mobile app.
Thank you, William. Now, Ramesh and Steph, before I give some closing remarks, Ramesh, go ahead.
Oh, there are numerous applications. I've been actually looking at stuff happening in India, especially with the recent upsurge, not just vaccine registrations, but things like where exactly are the oxygen concentrators? How many beds are in ICU units? Because the government has really no control over these things. There are numerous private hospitals, and who tracks these? So they've developed all kinds of social media apps. And they've even passed some to me sitting here in the US, because there are so many of us who are here, and we want to look after parents or family in India. And so there's a lot of orchestrating going on from here. Hey, go to this hospital, and you already see that there are 50 beds there, or something like that. So there are all these things happening, along with the where to provide meals, where to get meals, how to transport these things from here to there, how to provide for the nurses, how to provide the logistics for the doctors to get to their hospitals, and the ambulances and all of that. So there are, as Colin would understand, there are a lot of second order and third order networks that are developed as a result of this. And actually, it's fortunately, the cases are beginning to drop now, come down, and I think they are beginning to get some control over the situation. So it's another book.
Yes, that was one of my closing comments, actually. Yes, Steph, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just very briefly, I feel like one of the things that was very easy to observe in all of these discussions around tech and like trying to fix things for the pandemic with technology was just the rampant tech solutionism. Like there were so many suggestions that were being spread that were clearly just not the best way to solve certain problems. Like for example, cameras installed everywhere that would just record everyone's temperature and thereby fix, you know, the pandemic. But one thing that I do want to say that was positive, that in Austria was, for example, one of the contact tracing apps. When it came out, people really did a good job with the privacy aspect of the data and how that was handled and where it wasn't stored and where it wasn't shared. So I don't know, it was just worth sharing that as a good example, because you don't always see, like when we talk about like mobile technologies and data and privacy, we mostly only have examples of where it's done wrong. So it's sometimes nice to have an example where somebody tried and do like a good job, even if it's like a national wide app.
Thank you, Steph. Well, I mean, in the end, the tensions remain, tensions between inclusion and exclusion, privacy issues, concentrations of markets, of governments in trying to use the technologies, mobile technologies, to suppress expression, where people, on the other hand, movements, people, the voice of the people also use the same technologies. So technologies are there, but they can be used in different ways and create tensions. And now with the pandemic is just a whole a new set of challenges that technology may seem to be solving, but they're creating other issues as well. So I think that going back to what also Carlos said, I mean, that this always reminds us that the A2K paradigm is a fantastic tool to look at the issues, to look at inclusion and exclusion. I have one chapter in the book that looks at Uber, the regulation of Uber in Egypt, and all it does is just look at the large companies as if this is all that exists, like there's just complete blur without looking at the small businesses and the startups and the small players in the market. So it's very important to bear in mind the A2K paradigm in looking at these issues. I think you guys have done a fantastic job of putting the book together. Chapter authors, great work. Everyone who's contributed to this, I thank you very much for bringing this book to life, but also for your contributions today. My sincere thanks to our partners at Yale ISP, Nick, and to our partners also at ITS Rio, long time partners, Carlos and Selina, but also to our speakers, to Ramesh, to Steph, to Harry, to William, and to Colin. What remains for me is to thank my team at the Access to Knowledge for Development Center, each and everyone, and Gina, who has helped put all of this together. Looking forward to our next project and our next conversations, and thanks to everyone who's joined us today. Have a wonderful rest of day, evening, morning, night, and let's continue the conversation about A2K and inclusion and human rights. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Talk soon. Bye-bye now.
Bye. Bye-bye.